The cathedral was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I sat in the front pew, my black dress feeling heavy against my skin, staring at the ornate mahogany casket that supposedly held my husband's body. Adrian had been gone for a week now, and I still couldn't believe he was really dead. Behind me, hundreds of mourners filled the massive cathedral. Adrian's family had insisted on this grand funeral, befitting a Blackwell, as his mother Helena had said with that cold smile of hers. The flower arrangements alone probably cost more than I made in 6 months teaching kindergarten. Father Morrison's voice echoed through the vaulted ceiling as he delivered the final prayers. We commit Adrian Blackwell's soul to eternal rest, knowing that his memory will live on in the hearts of those who loved him. Helena sat beside me, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Though I'd noticed she never actually seemed to produce any tears. Her older son Cameron sat on her other side, his face a mask of stoic grief that somehow felt more like a performance than genuine sorrow. May his soul rest in eternal peace, Father Morrison concluded. And may those he left behind find comfort in... My phone vibrated in my purse. I almost ignored it. Who would text me during my husband's funeral? But something made me glance down at the screen, expecting maybe a condolence message from a friend who couldn't attend. Instead, I saw words that made my blood turn to ice. I'm not dead. I'm not in that coffin. My hands started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. This had to be some kind of sick joke, some twisted person who thought it would be funny to torment a grieving widow. I looked around quickly to make sure no one had noticed my reaction. Helena was still dabbing her eyes. Cameron was staring straight ahead at the casket, and the rest of the family seemed appropriately somber. With trembling fingers, I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "I can't reveal myself. They're watching. Never trust my family." The cathedral suddenly felt freezing cold. I stared at the message, reading it over and over, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Never trust my family. I looked at Helena, who had been so kind to me this past week, helping me with all the funeral arrangements when I was too devastated to think straight. I looked at Cameron, who had taken care of all the legal paperwork and insurance claims without me having to worry about any of it. Another message appeared on my screen. "Your life is in danger. I'll contact you again tonight. Delete these messages now." I stared at the words until they blurred together. My life is in danger? This couldn't be real. This had to be someone playing a horrible prank on me during the worst week of my life. But what if it wasn't? What if Adrian was somehow, impossibly, still alive? "Nina, dear, are you all right?" Helena's voice was soft and concerned as she placed a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. "You look pale." I quickly deleted the messages and put my phone away, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm fine. Just overwhelmed." "Of course you are, sweetheart," Helena said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "This is so difficult for all of us. Adrian was such a special young man." Cameron leaned over to look at me, his dark eyes unreadable. "Maybe you should step outside for some air. This has been a long service." "No, I'm okay," I said quickly. Something about the way they were both watching me made my skin crawl. "I want to stay until the end." Father Morrison was blessing the casket now, and soon the pallbearers would carry it to the hearse. In a few hours, Adrian's body would be cremated, just as Helena had insisted was what he would have wanted. But what if there was no body in that casket? What if someone in this cathedral, maybe someone sitting right next to me, knew exactly where my husband really was? As we stood for the final hymn, I tried to keep my face composed while my mind raced with terrifying possibilities. If Adrian was alive, why was he hiding? And if his own family couldn't be trusted, what kind of danger was I really in? 18 months earlier, I thought I was living in a fairy tale. It was a Tuesday morning in October when Adrian Blackwell first walked into my kindergarten classroom at Riverside Elementary. I was helping little Timothy tie his shoes when Ms. Rodriguez, our principal, knocked on my door. "Nina, this is Mr. Blackwell from the Financial Crimes Unit," she said. "He's here to do that fraud prevention presentation for the teachers." I looked up to see a tall man with kind brown eyes and a genuine smile, wearing a simple navy suit that looked expensive but not flashy. Most of the guest speakers we got were either boring or condescending, treating elementary teachers like we couldn't understand complex topics. Adrian was different. "Please call me Adrian," he said, shaking my hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just shoe-tying lessons," I replied, gesturing to Timothy, who was now proudly showing off his successfully tied sneakers. "Very advanced stuff." Adrian laughed, and I noticed how his whole face lit up when he smiled. "That's definitely more important than what I'm here to talk about. Shoe tying is a crucial life skill." During his presentation that afternoon, Adrian explained financial scams in simple terms without being patronizing. He made the topic interesting and relevant, sharing real stories about how criminals targeted schools and teachers. But what impressed me most was how he interacted with the kids when they peeked into our meeting room. "Are you a police officer?" little Mia asked, wide-eyed. "Something like that," Adrian said, kneeling down to her level. "I help catch bad guys who try to steal people's money." "Like pirates?" another student asked. "Exactly like pirates," Adrian said seriously, "except they wear suits instead of eye patches." After the presentation, Adrian lingered while I cleaned up my classroom. "Your students seem wonderful," he said, helping me stack chairs. "You must love teaching." "I do," I said. "Even on the hard days, seeing them learn something new makes everything worth it." "That's beautiful," Adrian said, and I could tell he meant it. "Most people just see teaching as babysitting, but what you do actually shapes who these kids become." We talked for another hour about everything. My passion for education, his work investigating financial crimes, our shared love of old movies, and terrible coffee shop music. When he finally asked if I'd like to have dinner sometime, I said yes without hesitation. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown, nothing fancy or impressive. Adrian drove an older Honda Civic and apologized for not picking somewhere nicer. "This is perfect," I assured him. "I'm not really a fancy restaurant kind of person anyway." "Good," Adrian said, looking relieved. "Because honestly, most of those places are just overpriced and pretentious." I found out later that Adrian came from serious money. The Blackwell family owned half the commercial real estate in the city, but you'd never know it from how he acted. He was humble, down to earth, and seemed genuinely interested in my life and thoughts. "My family can be intense," he warned me after we'd been dating for a few weeks. "They have very specific ideas about how things should be done." "What kind of ideas?" "Oh, social expectations, business networking, marrying the right kind of person." Adrian made air quotes, looking embarrassed. "They mean well, but they can be overwhelming." When I finally met Helena and Cameron at a family dinner, I understood what Adrian meant. They were polite, but cold, asking pointed questions about my family background and career aspirations like they were conducting a job interview. "Teaching is so noble," Helena said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Such a service-oriented profession." Cameron barely spoke to me at all, spending most of the evening discussing business deals and investment opportunities with Adrian, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the night went on. "They'll warm up," Adrian assured me later. "They just need time to get to know you." But even then, I could see the tension between Adrian and his family. They treated him like he was naive or idealistic, dismissing his work as playing policeman instead of joining the family business. Adrian proposed 8 months later in my classroom after school, surrounded by finger paintings and alphabet charts. "This is where I knew I loved you," he said, getting down on one knee. "Where I saw how much you care about making the world better." I said yes immediately, not caring about the modest ring or simple setting. All I cared about was Adrian. I had no idea that loving him would almost get me killed. 6 weeks before Adrian died, he started acting like a different person. It began with small things that I initially dismissed as work stress. Adrian would jump when I came into a room unexpectedly, his whole body tensing like he'd been caught doing something wrong. He started checking and double-checking our door locks every night, sometimes getting up at 2 a.m. to make sure they were secure. "Adrian, what's wrong?" I asked one morning after finding him peeking through our bedroom curtains at the street below. "Nothing," he said quickly, dropping the curtain like it had burned him. "Just thought I heard something outside." But our neighborhood was quiet and safe. We'd never had any problems in the 3 years we'd lived there. The paranoia got worse. Adrian began asking me strange questions about my daily routine, what time I left for work, which route I took, whether I'd noticed anyone following me or watching the house. "Have you seen any unfamiliar cars parked on our street?" he asked one evening while I was grading papers. "I don't think so. Why would I be looking for unfamiliar cars?" "Just pay attention, okay? And maybe start taking different routes to school. Mix it up a little." I set down my pen and looked at him. "Adrian, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He sat down beside me on the couch, running his hands through his hair, something he only did when he was really stressed. "I discovered something at work," he said finally. "Something that changes everything I thought I knew about people I trusted." "What kind of something?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "The case I've been working on, the money laundering investigation, it's bigger than I thought. And it involves people who are a lot more dangerous than I realized." "Dangerous how?" "The kind of people who make problems disappear, Nina. Permanently." A chill ran down my spine. Adrian had worked financial crimes for years, but he'd never talked about his cases being physically dangerous before. "Maybe you should ask to be transferred to a different case," I suggested. "I can't do that," Adrian said firmly. "Too many people are being hurt by this. I have to see it through." Adrian started working late almost every night, claiming he was building an airtight case against the criminals. He'd come home exhausted and distracted, barely eating dinner before disappearing into his home office to continue working. "What exactly are you trying to prove?" I asked one night when he emerged from his office at midnight. "That even people with money and power can't escape justice," he said. "That being rich and influential doesn't make you untouchable." Something about the way he said it made me uneasy. "Adrian, this isn't about your family, is it?" His face went completely pale. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you've been weird around them lately. At dinner last Sunday, you barely said 2 words to your mother." Adrian sat down heavily at our kitchen table. "Nina, what if I told you that everything you thought you knew about someone was a lie? That the people you trusted most in the world were actually what?" "Nothing." Forget I said anything. But Adrian's behavior around his family did become increasingly strange. He'd tense up whenever Helena called, and he started declining family dinner invitations, claiming he was too busy with work. The night before his death, Adrian was more agitated than I'd ever seen him. He paced around our living room for hours, checking his phone constantly and jumping at every small sound. "I need you to promise me something," he said suddenly, sitting down and taking my hands in his. "What?" "If anything ever happens to me, and I mean anything, don't trust anyone in my family completely, no matter how helpful they seem or how much they claim to care about you." "Adrian, you're really frightening me now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key. "This is for a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box number 247. If you ever feel threatened or unsafe, go there. Everything you need to know is inside." "Threatened by who?" "By anyone. By everyone. Just promise me, Nina. Promise me you'll only trust Detective Luis Martinez from the police department. If something happens to me, go to him directly. Don't call 911. Don't go through normal channels. Call Martinez directly." I took the key with shaking hands. Why would I need to do any of that? Adrian pulled me close and held me tighter than he ever had before. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. The next morning, he kissed me goodbye like it was the last time he'd ever see me. And then he was gone forever. Or so I thought. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was jolted awake by the shrill ringing, my heart immediately racing with the kind of panic that comes from middle-of-the-night calls. When I saw Helena's name on the caller ID, I knew something terrible had happened. "Nina, sweetheart." Helena's voice was shaky but controlled. "I need you to sit down. There's been an accident." The words that followed felt like they were coming from underwater. Single car crash, remote mountain highway. Adrian was driving back from a business meeting in Denver when his car went off the road. "He's gone, dear," Helena said gently. "Adrian is gone." I don't remember much about the rest of that night. Cameron arrived at my house within an hour, which seemed impossibly fast considering he lived across town. Helena followed shortly after, both of them taking charge of everything while I sat in my living room in shock. "We've already spoken to the authorities," Cameron said, his voice professional and detached. "The car went off a cliff and caught fire. The damage was extensive." "I want to see him," I whispered. Helena and Cameron exchanged a quick glance. "That's not possible, sweetheart," Helena said, placing a manicured hand on my shoulder. "The fire was very severe. We'll need dental records for identification." Over the next few days, Adrian's family handled everything. They arranged the funeral, chose the casket, selected the flowers, even wrote the obituary without consulting me. When I tried to ask questions about the accident or request details about what Adrian was doing in Denver, they gently but firmly discouraged me. "The important thing now is healing and moving forward," Helena said when I asked to speak with the investigating officers. "Dwelling on the details will only make this harder for you." "But I don't understand why Adrian was in Denver. He didn't mention any business trip to me." Cameron looked up from the funeral arrangements he was reviewing. "Adrian handled a lot of sensitive cases, Nina. He often couldn't discuss the details, even with family." "Since when? He always told me about his work." "Not the confidential investigations," Helena said smoothly. "The ones involving dangerous criminals. Adrian was protecting you by keeping you uninformed. They insisted on a closed casket, claiming it was for the best given the condition of the body. They also decided on immediate cremation after the funeral service. Adrian always preferred simplicity," Helena explained when I questioned these decisions. "He wouldn't have wanted people gawking at him or making a fuss." But Adrian had never expressed any of those preferences to me. In fact, we'd never discussed funeral arrangements at all because we were both young and healthy and expected to live for decades. The only person who seemed to share my doubts was Detective Luis Martinez, the officer who had investigated the crash scene. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said, approaching me after the funeral service, "I'm sorry for your loss. I wanted you to know that if you have any questions about the accident, you can contact me directly." He handed me his card, and I noticed Helena watching us from across the room, her expression sharp and alert. "Were there any witnesses?" I asked quietly. Detective Martinez shook his head. "Unfortunately, no. It happened on a very remote stretch of highway around midnight. The car wasn't discovered until morning." "And you're sure it was an accident?" He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "The physical evidence supports that conclusion. However, there were some irregularities that I'd hoped to investigate further." "What kind of irregularities?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss details of an ongoing investigation. But, Mrs. Blackwell, if you ever feel unsafe or if anything unusual happens, please call me immediately." Before I could ask what he meant, Helena appeared at my side. "Detective Martinez," she said with a cold smile, "thank you so much for your thorough investigation. I trust the case can be closed now so Nina can begin to heal. Actually, there are still some I'm sure there are always loose ends in these tragic situations, Helena interrupted smoothly, but prolonging the investigation will only cause Nina more pain. After Detective Martinez left, Helena linked her arm through mine. You should think about selling this house, she said as we walked to her car. Too many memories. Cameron found a lovely condo downtown that would be perfect for a fresh start. A fresh start. They wanted me to erase Adrian from my life as quickly as possible. But I wasn't ready to let go, and I was starting to wonder if there was a reason they wanted me to. The messages started coming every night after the funeral. They arrived at different times, sometimes around midnight, sometimes at 3 a.m., always when I was alone in the house that felt too big and too quiet without Adrian. They're watching your house. Don't let them see you reading these messages. Check your rearview mirror when you drive. You're being followed. The key Adrian gave you. Use it. Box 247 at First National Bank. Go alone. I wanted to believe these were just cruel pranks from someone who had read about Adrian's death in the newspaper. But the messages contained details that only Adrian would know, like the safety deposit box key he'd given me the night before he died. 3 days after the funeral, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to First National Bank during my lunch break, my hand shaking as I handed the key to the bank employee. Box 247, she said, checking her records. Right this way, Mrs. Blackwell. The safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected, and it was packed with documents, photographs, and USB drives. My heart pounded as I opened the first folder. Financial records, bank statements, transaction logs, all bearing the Blackwell family business letterhead. But these weren't normal business documents. They showed money moving through dozens of shell companies, international wire transfers to accounts in countries I'd never heard of, and cash deposits that were immediately converted and moved again. As I studied the papers, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The Blackwell family businesses, the real estate companies, the investment firms, the property management groups, were all fronts for a massive money laundering operation. Adrian had documented everything. Photos of meetings between Helena and men in expensive suits who looked like they'd stepped out of a crime movie. Recordings of phone conversations where Helena discussed cleaning large sums of money and making problems disappear. In one folder, I found a family tree that Adrian had created, showing how the Blackwell criminal network operated. Helena was at the top as the mastermind, with Cameron handling what Adrian had labeled enforcement and elimination of threats. Elimination of threats. I felt sick as I read through Adrian's notes about his family's activities. They weren't just washing dirty money, they were connected to drug trafficking, human smuggling, and international arms dealing. The legitimate businesses Adrian's family had built over decades were just elaborate covers for criminal activities worth hundreds of millions of dollars. At the bottom of the box, I found a letter in Adrian's handwriting. Nina, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and it probably wasn't an accident. I discovered that my family has been lying to me my entire life. They're not successful business people. They're criminals who have built an empire on blood money. I gathered this evidence to expose them, but I think they figured out what I was doing. Helena and Cameron have been watching me, and I'm afraid they're planning to eliminate me before I can go to the authorities. If I disappear or die, do not trust my family. They will try to comfort you and help you move on, but it's all an act. You represent a potential threat to their operation because you might know something or ask too many questions. The USB drives contain everything the FBI needs to bring them down. Detective Martinez is the only person I trust in law enforcement. He's been helping me build this case in secret. Give him everything in this box. I love you more than life itself. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive. I was trying to protect you from this world. Be careful. Be smart. And please, please don't trust anyone with the last name Blackwell. Adrian. I sat in that small, windowless room, surrounded by evidence that the family who had been so kind and supportive during my grief had actually murdered my husband. Helena, who had held me while I cried and helped plan Adrian's funeral, was a criminal mastermind. Cameron, who had handled all the legal paperwork and insurance claims, was an enforcer who eliminated threats to the family business. And Adrian hadn't died in an accident. His own family had killed him to protect their criminal empire. I carefully photographed every document with my phone before putting everything back in the box. As I walked out of the bank, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street with two men inside watching the entrance. They're watching your house. You're being followed. The mysterious messages weren't pranks. They were warnings. And whoever was sending them was trying to keep me alive long enough to expose the truth about what the Blackwell family had done to Adrian. That night, the message I'd been both hoping for and dreading finally arrived. Nina, it's really me. I know this is impossible to believe, but I'm alive. I stared at my phone screen in the darkness of my bedroom, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This couldn't be real. I'd watched them lower Adrian's casket into the ground. I'd thrown dirt on his grave. But then another message appeared that made my breath catch. Remember our first date? You wore that blue dress with tiny flowers and you spilled marinara sauce on it. You were so embarrassed, but I thought you looked perfect. I told you it matched your eyes. Nobody else knew that detail. Not Helena, not Cameron, not even my best friend. Only Adrian. My hands shaking, I typed back, "How is this possible?" I faked my death with help from my friend Jordan. We staged the car crash using a body from the morgue. I had to disappear before my family killed me for real. Jordan. I remembered Adrian mentioning him, a childhood friend who'd joined the military and specialized in covert operations. Adrian had said Jordan was good at making things disappear when they needed to disappear. Why didn't you tell me? Because they were watching you. They had to believe you were genuinely grieving, or they would have become suspicious. I've been hiding in a safe house, gathering more evidence while making sure you stayed safe. Tears streamed down my face as I realized what this meant. Adrian was alive. The man I'd mourned, the husband I'd lost, was actually out there somewhere, protecting me from a distance. Where are you? I can't say over text, but Nina, you're in immediate danger. Helena and Cameron know you went to the bank today. They've been having you followed since the funeral, and they saw you access the safety deposit box. My blood turned to ice. The black sedan I'd noticed outside the bank. The cars I'd been seeing in my neighborhood that seemed out of place. They'd been watching me for weeks. They think you know too much now. They're planning to eliminate you before you can expose them. What do? First, act normal. Don't let them know you suspect anything. If they call or visit, be the grieving widow who just wants to be left alone. Another message followed immediately. Second, pack a small bag and hide it somewhere they won't look. Include cash, your passport, and the USB drives from the safety deposit box. You may need to disappear quickly. Third, tomorrow night, tell them you're going to visit your sister in Portland for a few days. Instead, come to the old warehouse district on Pier 47, Building 12, second floor. Come alone and make sure you're not followed. My sister lived in Portland, and I'd been talking about needing to get away for a while. It was the perfect cover story. How do I know I'm not being followed? Jordan will teach you. He'll be watching the route to make sure you're clean before you come inside. If anything feels wrong, if you see the same car twice, abort and go straight to Detective Martinez. Adrian, I'm scared. I know, baby. I'm scared too. But we're almost done. Once we give all the evidence to the FBI, Helena and Cameron will be arrested and we can disappear together until it's safe to come home. Disappear? Witness protection. It's the only way to stay safe from their associates. The Blackwell operation has connections all over the world, but we'll be together and that's all that matters. I held my phone against my chest, overwhelmed with relief and terror in equal measure. Adrian was alive. My husband, the love of my life, was alive and coming back to me. But first, we had to survive long enough to bring down his family. Delete these messages now. Adrian's final text read. And Nina, I love you. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single second. As I deleted our conversation, I heard a car door slam outside my house. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. Cameron was walking up my front steps at midnight. I quickly put my phone in my nightstand drawer and tried to control my breathing. Whatever Cameron wanted at this hour, it couldn't be good. The doorbell rang, and I knew I was about to face the most dangerous performance of my life. Cameron's midnight visit was terrifying in its normalcy. I'm sorry to bother you so late, he said when I opened the door, looking perfectly composed despite the hour. I was driving by and saw your lights on. I wanted to check on you. I forced myself to appear tired and grief-stricken. I can't sleep. Everything reminds me of Adrian. Of course, Cameron said, stepping inside without invitation. Grief affects everyone differently. Some people find it helpful to relocate, start fresh somewhere new. His eyes swept over my living room, taking inventory of everything. Have you given any more thought to selling the house? Maybe, I said carefully. I've been thinking about visiting my sister in Portland for a few days, just to get away from everything here. Cameron nodded approvingly. That sounds like an excellent idea. When were you thinking of going? Tomorrow night, probably. I could use some time away. Perfect timing, Cameron said, and something in his smile made my skin crawl. Helena and I were just discussing how a change of scenery might be exactly what you need. After he left, I sat awake all night, terrified they were planning to kill me during my supposed trip to Portland. But I had to trust Adrian's plan. I had to believe he and Jordan would keep me safe. The next evening, I followed Adrian's instructions exactly. I told Helena I was leaving for Portland, packed my car with obvious luggage, and drove toward the highway. Then I doubled back through side streets, checking my mirrors constantly for the tail I knew would be there. I spotted the black sedan after 10 minutes. It followed me for several miles before another car, Jordan's, I assumed, cut between us at a traffic light. By the time I reached the warehouse district, I was certain I'd lost them. Building 12 looked abandoned from the outside, but when I climbed to the second floor, I found a door slightly ajar. Nina? Adrian's voice. Really, his voice, not a text message or a phone call, but actually him speaking my name. I pushed through the door and there he was, my husband, alive, real, and reaching for me with tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, he whispered as I collapsed into his arms. I'm so sorry I had to let you think I was dead. I'm sorry you had to go through the funeral, the grief, all of it. You're alive, I sobbed against his chest. You're really alive. I'm alive and we're going to be okay. Jordan emerged from the shadows, a tall, serious man who looked like he could disappear into thin air if necessary. We need to move, he said. The FBI is waiting. What happened next felt like something from a movie. Federal agents surrounded the building as Adrian and I were escorted to a secure location. Using the evidence Adrian had gathered, plus additional proof he'd collected while in hiding, they executed coordinated raids across the city. Helena was arrested at her mansion while hosting a dinner party, led away in handcuffs in front of her shocked socialite friends. Cameron was taken at his office, along with a dozen associates who'd been meeting to discuss the Nina problem. The money laundering operation involved over $200 million, Detective Martinez explained as we waited in the federal building. Your evidence brought down one of the largest criminal networks on the West Coast. But the victory felt hollow compared to having Adrian back. What happens now? I asked as we signed paperwork for witness protection. Now we disappear, Adrian said, taking my hand. New names, new location, new life, at least until the trials are over and we know it's safe. What about my students, my job? You'll teach again, Adrian promised. Somewhere new with a new name, but you'll still be helping kids learn and grow. That's who you are, Nina. That's who I fell in love with. 6 months later, We were living in a small town in Montana under the names Sarah and Michael Patterson. I was teaching second grade at the local elementary school. Adrian worked as a bookkeeper for a veterinary clinic. We were different people on paper, but we were still us. Still the couple who fell in love in a kindergarten classroom, still the team who brought down a criminal empire together. And every morning when I woke up next to him, I remembered that sometimes the impossible can happen. Sometimes the dead can come back to life. Sometimes love really is stronger than fear.